The HOA thought they owned everything behind those gates. They had no idea who they were about to threaten. On a quiet summer morning, Daniel stepped out to his backyard pool, the only calm place he had after long nights away. The water reflected the sky, peaceful and still, until a sharp knock broke the silence. A woman in designer sunglasses stood at the fence, arms crossed, eyes burning with entitlement. She was the HOA board president, known by everyone as Karen, and she had a reputation for turning rules into weapons. She demanded his pool keys, claiming the HOA had decided to temporarily take control for a private event. Daniel listened politely, saying the pool was on his deed and not HOA property. Karen laughed, loud and confident, promising this wouldn't end there. She warned him that rules would be enforced today, one way or another. As she stormed off, Daniel noticed neighbors peeking through blinds, already used to her tactics. What they didn't know was that Daniel wasn't just another quiet homeowner. He had moved here intentionally, under a name that wasn't his own, for reasons far bigger than a pool dispute. As the gate closed behind Karen, Daniel checked his phone, calm but alert, knowing the next move wouldn't be small. The moment had been set, and the HOA had just crossed a line they couldn't step back from, not this time, not ever again. Karen didn't wait long to escalate. She never did when control slipped from her hands. Within an hour, a police cruiser rolled through the neighborhood, lights off but presence loud. Karen walked beside it, confidence restored, lips curled in victory. Her husband stepped out, uniform crisp, posture firm, already assuming authority. Neighbors gathered, whispering as Karen loudly explained how Daniel had stolen HOA property and refused to comply. The officer approached the gate, asking Daniel to hand over the keys to avoid further trouble. Daniel remained calm, respectful, and cooperative in tone, but he refused again. He explained the pool was private, documented, and not subject to HOA seizure. Karen scoffed, waving printed rules that conveniently skipped property law. The officer hesitated, sensing something off, but pressure from his wife was heavy. She demanded action, insisting this was a simple violation. Daniel asked a single question in return, one that shifted the air. He asked if this was an official investigation or a personal request. The officer paused, unsure how to answer. Karen snapped, demanding compliance immediately. Daniel nodded slowly, saying he would cooperate fully, but only through proper channels. That answer irritated Karen more than refusal. She accused him of hiding something, of thinking he was above the law. As the officer radioed in for guidance, Daniel's phone vibrated quietly in his pocket, a message he had expected. This situation was unfolding exactly as designed, and Karen had no idea she was helping expose something far bigger than a pool key dispute. The neighborhood felt tense, like air before a storm. Everyone sensed something was about to break. Karen pushed harder, telling her husband to detain Daniel for obstruction. The officer hesitated again, clearly conflicted. Daniel spoke calmly, stating he had legal representation and requested that any further action include a supervisor. That request triggered Karen's temper. She accused Daniel of threatening her authority and wasting police time. Neighbors recorded quietly from phones, knowing how these situations usually ended. But this time felt different. The officer received a response over his radio and stiffened instantly. His expression changed, eyes lifting toward Daniel with confusion and concern. Karen noticed and demanded answers. Daniel finally reached into his wallet, pulling out an identification card he hadn't shown anyone in years. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smirk. He simply held it up. The officer froze. He took a step back, eyes widening as he read the credentials. Karen laughed nervously, assuming it was fake, until she saw her husband's reaction. He went silent, face pale, posture shifting from authority to uncertainty. Daniel explained calmly that he was living under an approved identity, placed in the neighborhood for an ongoing federal investigation involving misuse of authority, harassment, and corruption within several HOAs. Karen's laughter vanished. The street went silent. Neighbors leaned closer. The officer quietly asked for confirmation, already knowing the answer. Daniel nodded once. The power dynamic flipped in a single breath, and Karen realized the rules she hid behind were about to become evidence. Karen tried to speak, but no words came out. Control had slipped completely from her grasp. her husband asked Daniel to lower the ID, his voice no longer commanding. He requested verification through proper channels, suddenly careful with every word. Daniel agreed and made a call. Within minutes, an unmarked vehicle arrived, its presence subtle but undeniable. Two individuals stepped out, calm, professional, and unmistakably federal. They greeted Daniel by a different name, one Karen had never heard before. The realization hit her like ice. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was real. Neighbors watched as Karen's printed HOA rules were ignored entirely. The federal agents asked questions about HOA enforcement, selective rule application, and repeated harassment complaints. Karen tried to redirect blame, insisting she was only protecting community standards. The agents listened politely, taking notes. Her husband stood quietly, hands clasped, understanding now how serious the situation had become. Daniel explained that the pool incident was one of many reports involving abuse of authority and intimidation. Karen's confident posture collapsed as neighbors began speaking up, sharing their own stories. One by one, complaints poured out. The agents thanked everyone and assured them follow-ups would come. Karen looked around, realizing the community she controlled no longer feared her. She had pulled power too often, too loudly, and today it answered back. As the agents prepared to leave, Daniel turned once more toward Karen, his tone calm but final, telling her the investigation had just found its clearest example yet. The days that followed felt unreal for the neighborhood, silence replaced fear, and tension slowly lifted, HOA notices stopped appearing. Karen stopped attending meetings. Her husband was placed on administrative leave, not as punishment, but to avoid conflict during review. Federal inquiries continued quietly, professionally. Daniel returned to being just another neighbor, swimming in his pool like nothing had happened. But people knew now. They waved. They smiled. Some thanked him without saying why. The HOA board issued a formal apology, retracting previous threats and clarifying property rights. Rules were rewritten, enforcement reviewed, and transparency promised. Karen eventually resigned, citing personal reasons, though everyone understood the truth. She avoided eye contact when moving out weeks later. Daniel watched from a distance, not with pride, but relief. The mission wasn't revenge. It was balance. He had never intended to expose himself, but sometimes the truth demands daylight. Neighbors gathered one evening by the pool, laughing, relaxed, finally free. Daniel knew his time there was ending soon. Another assignment would come, another quiet life somewhere else. But this place would remember the moment power failed to recognize the limits of its reach. And that lesson would last far longer than any investigation ever could. Before Daniel left, one final HOA meeting was held. This time, fear wasn't in the room. A temporary board addressed residents honestly, acknowledging mistakes and outlining safeguards to prevent abuse again. Residents spoke openly, no longer worried about retaliation. Trust began rebuilding, slowly but sincerely. Daniel attended quietly, sitting in the back. Few knew his real role, and fewer needed to. When asked to share thoughts, he stood briefly, reminding everyone that rules exist to serve communities, not control them. Applause followed, not loud, but meaningful. Afterward, a neighbor asked if he would miss the place. Daniel smiled and said some places leave more than memories. As night fell, he packed his things, removing traces of the identity he'd lived under. The pool reflected the stars, calm again. The phone rang with his next destination. Another quiet street. Another hidden truth. As he drove away before sunrise, the neighborhood slept peacefully, unaware they had been part of a story that would never make headlines, but would change lives all the same. The HOA learned that authority without humility invites consequences. And Daniel carried that reminder with him, knowing sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it simply waits. Months later, the neighborhood thrived quietly, and the story became a warning whispered, not forgotten. New residents heard it slowly, always ending the same way, with disbelief and relief. An HOA that overreached. A woman who pushed too far. And a man who reminded everyone that power answers to something higher. Daniel never returned, but his impact remained. The pool stayed private. Rules stayed fair. Fear never did. Somewhere else, under another name, Daniel continued his work, protecting communities by letting truth surface naturally. He never thought of himself as a hero, just someone who understood systems from the inside. Karen's freeze at the truth became legend, not because of embarrassment, but because it proved no title is above accountability. The neighborhood moved on stronger, wiser, and quieter. And that was the real victory, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.